Next up, I'm super excited to announce that we have Arianne Flemming, from the COO, of Informal Systems, here to chat with us. And I'll let her take the stage. How are you? Can we do a mic check quick?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Perfect, loud and clear. The
awesome.
stage is yours. Have
now
fun.
Let me just share my screen. Great. Can you see? Everything good? Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks for having me. I am Arianne Flemming. I'm COO of Informal Systems. Informal is a core development contributor in the Cosmos network, and we're focused on supporting and building a secure multi-chain Internet of Blockchains. So at Informal, I focus on the non-technical aspects of our work, and I've played various roles in organizations supporting the Cosmos network for the past 3 years. And today I'm not going to discuss our specific work at Informal or our role in Cosmos. I've had colleagues who have discussed on these topics, and hopefully tune into their talks. But instead, I'm going to discuss how the nature of the blockchain industry is changing the game of managing companies, and how we have to think about company management in terms of sustainability in order to bridge the gap of old world centralized systems and this new world of coordination, autonomy, and incentive alignment. Building a business is hard. If you take guidance from any traditional startup mantra, it'll tell you you must work with good people, don't run out of money, and build something customers want. This all works well and fine in the old definition of traditional YC-like startups, with founders working together in their basement, staying tight on finances, and quickly iterating on an MVP, and trying to raise money, and constantly chasing MRR to prove out product market fit. But this model doesn't hold so easily when we are talking about building public goods like blockchains. Zaki Mannion gave a great talk at the MIT Bitcoin Expo back in 2019, and on defining the MVP for the next generation of blockchains, really highlighting how the product development cycle for traditional startups isn't on the same timescale as building public blockchain infrastructure. However, the notion of getting users and feedback as quickly as possible still stands as important. We don't need to ship the pièce de résistance only to find out no one wants to use it. So we have to reconcile the tension between building public infrastructure and lean startup principles. So while we fund blockchain development like infrastructure, the irony of companies and people building these large-scale public infrastructures is that at the end of the day, they're startups whose biggest risks are not technical, they're operational. They're just teams figuring out effective ways of working together to ship software that can be validated in the market. However, while they may structurally be startups, they can't always act like startups. All types of companies in this industry, from those building public goods to those building solution-specific applications, must operate more like multinational organizations that have global risk profiles and coordination concerns. And so we have to reconcile the tension between complex company operations and lean startup principles in an industry where the technology is advancing ahead of company development. So ultimately, the nature of the blockchain industry is not only changing the nature of achieving product market fit and building something customers want, but ultimately the process of managing the companies that are doing this product development work has changed completely and changed the rules of the game for company operations. So while the technology is unlocking new kinds of potential that we've never seen before, we're still in a transition period, and I expect to be for quite some time, between this old world of centralized systems and middlemen and this new world of coordination, autonomy, and incentive alignment. And in order to make these revolutionary technologies realize their true potential and make it to market to become the practical, useful technologies that promise to push society forward, we need to manage pragmatism over tribalism and bridge the old world with the new world. Seems to be a theme this morning. So in turn, we need to set up company operations with this transition in mind and hedge risk in the old world while taking advantages of opportunity in the new world in order to be sustainable. So I'm going to talk about 3 areas of company operations that the blockchain industry has completely turned on its head. So first, hiring, working with good people. Second, social coordination, collaborating effectively as a team to build something customers want. And finance, don't run out of money. So first, I'm gonna talk about hiring. As you all know, this industry is global in nature. More so than any other field in tech, the blockchain ecosystem has an unprecedented amount of remote and globally distributed teams. It's a truly global movement of passionate crusaders working on hard problems together in a distributed and remote fashion. These teams are more global than ever, and hiring good people in your startup doesn't just mean finding people in your city that you love to work with, but it means collaborating with people who were once strangers on the internet, because the industry has brought together people where passion overrides proximity. So how has the global nature of this industry impacted company operations? There's an inherent tension between the old world of hiring based on traditional country-specific employment law, rules, and regulations, and a global movement of people working together around the world. And while the teams building these blockchain technologies ideologically want to work without barriers, we're bound in many ways by the old system. We don't have global passports, and we have to compromise and operate within the existing structures. Have you ever had a painful contract negotiation experience with a candidate? You give them an offer letter and the candidate challenges everything in the offer and they want to change every line of your contract template. So you have to call your lawyer and you go back and forth a few times to talk about the changes. Now you can imagine the candidate that you want to hire is in a foreign country and their employment law rules say that the contract has to be in 2 different languages. And so you hired a local lawyer, but you don't speak the same language as them. So you don't really understand if you know the implications of what they're trying to tell you. And now multiply that confusion by 10 if you want to hire in 10 different countries. The surface area of risk when hiring globally grows exponentially. Not only is it hard enough for startups to keep up with one country, but these blockchain startups that hire globally now have to keep up with many. Hiring isn't just pulling a template employment contract from a startup agreement off the internet, because your employees are now in countries all around the world. The company you founded to build technology needs to be registered in a country to do business or hire. You may need a legal entity in a new location in order to hire there. You need to understand the labor laws and tax implications of each country. As many companies do, you could hire everyone as contractors, but that could be exposing your small startup to an unknown amount of risk and may not look out for the best interests of employees, especially those with families or aging parents where local insurance and employment benefits are important to them. So how can startups that are hiring globally hire while hedging this risk? There are some solutions that exist to hiring globally, like global employment outsourcing agencies that can act as an employer of record. But these solutions can be costly. You can lose operational control, you can lose the ability to take advantage of local grants or government financing opportunities, and ultimately they were created for much larger corporations. I've worked with a number of company structures that include subsidiaries in Canada and US and all over Europe. And after years in legal fees, we've essentially created a business-in-a-box company structure that easily allows you to create a hub-and-spoke model by setting up a North American parent company with wholly owned subsidiaries in Europe and a cost-plus service agreement that allows you to fund the entities in a transfer pricing compliant way. Transfer pricing isn't something that most startups even have to think about, and yet these global blockchain companies are getting an introduction to complex global accounting at a very early age. This model makes understanding the risk profile much more manageable and bounded, and I'll discuss more on hubs later. But ultimately, in order to be sustainable, we have to be able to work with great people. We have to learn to operate reasonably within existing paradigms in order to hedge our risk. Next, I'm going to talk about social coordination. In this industry, building something customers want is no longer the singular focus of one entity, but becomes a coordinated effort of many organizations working together towards a common goal. In Cosmos alone, we have 7 companies coordinating to make IBC come to life. As with the development and lifecycle with open source projects that are created and brought together by passionate developers all over the world, which then over time became the responsibility of individual companies to manage, the development of various aspects of blockchain infrastructure for many projects are becoming the responsibility of many distributed companies. Coordinating with people and organizations worldwide is not an easy feat. Have you ever run out of hours in the day to have meetings because suddenly it's nighttime in Europe and you couldn't cram enough morning meetings in before noon on the East Coast, or before 9 a.m. on the West Coast? If you're working with a global team, you better be a morning person on the West Coast and a night owl in Europe. As we balance the old world of everyone working together in an office or the same city to the new world of global coordination, we face complex and HR and process-oriented issues that generally startups don't have to deal with early on in their life cycle. Management and human resources attention suddenly became much more important and complex than it might at a traditional 15-person company where everyone sees each other every day. The coordination challenges for startups operating in a global environment have become amplified to be more like large global organizations. So what can distributed and remote companies do to help combat these challenges? Clear ownership and responsibility is key. Meeting regularly to ensure proactive connection efforts are made to build trust and cohesion, actively managing the goals of individuals on a team. Another solution that's been successful in my experience, not only for hiring, but for supporting distributed teams, is creating this hub model where people can go when they want and are able to in COVID-free times, so that you're remote first, but not remote only. Meaning you provide the freedom and flexibility for anyone to feel empowered to work remotely when they want, while also providing the space for in-person interactions. This allows for the best of both worlds, valuable in-person interaction time, while having the freedom, flexibility, and focus that a remote environment provides. This model makes running a global business easier from an operational perspective, while also fostering trust and cohesion within groups. The distributed nature of the industry is truly wonderful, and it opens so many doors. It brings together people from all over the world to passionately work on hard problems together. And it forces people to coordinate and build trust in new ways in our changing world. But as we bridge the old world of borders and boundaries and move towards working with people all over the world, it isn't a straightforward path to get there, and the intermediate path can come with trade-offs. It means that what would traditionally be straightforward operations has now forced these startups to act more like multinational companies with international offices, employees, payroll, taxes, risk profiles, employment laws, and internal coordination processes. Social coordination has changed and adapted. And while the blockchain industry has been in a perfect position to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic from a remote work perspective, there is a non-negligible cost to having remote work and the risk and complexities involved that these startups must address in order to be competitive and sustainable in the long run and be able to bring these revolutionary technologies to life. So now I'm going to talk about finance. The CFO of a Silicon Valley Series A or B funded startup would be focused on financial planning and constantly monitoring cash to make sure there's enough runway to make it to the next round of financing. They would be working with outside firms for accounting and end-of-month closes, making sure customers are paying on time, and more. There's lots of moving parts, but at least they're speaking a common language. They're getting paid in dollars and paying out in dollars. Now imagine you're not getting paid in dollars anymore, but you're taking payment for product or services in tokens. And some of these tokens might be liquid and some aren't, but we're still living in a world where we have to pay bills in dollars. Blockchain startups are playing a different game, managing the mantra of don't run out of cash. As startups from dev shops to exchanges to wallets to validators to companies building all kinds of decentralized applications are often taking payment in tokens. In order to bridge the operations of the world where expenses are paid in fiat and the token universe where we accept payment in tokens, we need to think about treasury management. Ultimately, Treasury Management just exploded in complexity compared to what our CFO at the Series A startup had to deal with. These token holdings introduce a whole new element of treasury management that many founders, particularly technical founders, never had to consider. There's a new level of both currency and liquidity risk to manage that traditional small startups don't generally face until they're much larger organizations. An expanded balance sheet of cash and tokens presents a huge opportunity for companies to grow their treasury and autonomously manage their wealth if balanced well. But many technical startup founders didn't sign up to manage a token fund. Traditional advice follows that cash is queen, and these startups are no longer just thinking about cash, but rather entire balance sheets of tokens alongside cash. Their startup operations are no longer about making sure they have enough cash in their checking account, but now you need to balance your token holdings while making sure you have enough liquid cash on hand to be paying salaries and lawyers and rent and taxes, which in particular can create a large risk profile for companies who receive revenue in non-cash assets. Instead of a traditional balance sheet with some cash and computer equipment, we've transformed the balance sheets to be highly complex with lots of variables and things to consider at all times. Cash flow management, crypto FX management, and long-term investments have now all come into play. We're seeing many traditional hedge funds and public firms expand their asset management to include crypto on their balance sheet, and they're holding Bitcoin as a store of value and hedge against inflation. But these companies also have lots of finance folks on staff to help secure and monitor this, and small companies focused on building don't always have such luxuries. Founders and early employees now need to decide for themselves how to manage their treasury. Do they take active positions? Do they speculate? Do they trade? These startups have just moved from operating their business to becoming investors in a fund. And if you manage the fund well and you balance long-term strategic vision with short-term liquidity, then for these startups, revenue may become irrelevant. In this new world, you're not a startup, you're a fund that may never need outside capital, unlocking new opportunities for startup founders who would traditionally have to spend sometimes 50% of their time fundraising to now being able to autonomously focus on their business. The highly publicized MicroStrategy expanded their balance sheet by purchasing about 38,000 Bitcoin for an average purchase price of around 11,000 per BTC. That's equal to about $740 million now, and that's an increase in over $300 million since Q3 of this year. So for context, MicroStrategy's earned about $78 million in net income in the last 3.5 years from their business operations as an enterprise business analytics and mobility platform. So effectively meaning that whatever product or service they offer may become irrelevant to the value of their company given their Bitcoin holdings, though they have this revenue as a backstop. The idea that the value of your business is not your core business is not unheard of. Saks Fifth Avenue wasn't bought as a clothing store, but as a real estate company with billions of dollars in asset value and far less in revenue. And as fundraisers and ICOs remove the need for organizations to raise money from venture capitalists, holding tokens may change the nature of services businesses from operating a consistent 25% margin to having a well-managed portfolio that allows for a very long runway. For companies holding a balance sheet of diverse assets, they must determine their asset management strategy. It could be conservative and passively hedged to manage cash and focus on sustainability, or it could be more aggressive and actively targeting returns, or it could be something in between. But regardless of the strategy, hedging is essential to bridge the world of fiat expenses and token revenue, because lack of hedging to fiat can cause serious liquidity strains and a resulting inability to meet obligations, forcing projects to liquidate at historical lows. So how can these startup mini funds think about hedging? Some options. You can choose to passively hedge, sell crypto preemptively to meet your fiat obligations. You could take a more active approach of selling the gains and buying the dips in order to rebalance your portfolio based off of percentage allocations. You could take advantage of the derivatives markets in order to achieve above market returns on your assets. In time, smart contract automation can help manage liquidity for organizations and create an autonomous buy-sell treasury function. But overall, for these emerging startup mini funds, I think it's most critical not to get too complicated, but don't take anything for granted either. We have to set strategies and stick to them in order to manage our cash while keeping sight of the potential upside, so that in the crypto winters, we'll be able to survive. As we move towards this new world of crypto becoming more integrated in society, we're entering a new era of business operations where we're moving from just operating our business to operating and investing. Maybe one day tax regulation in North America will allow us to transact in crypto without having a disposition on every transaction and make it a more viable solution for ongoing payments. Or if not, we can all leave and move to crypto-friendly Portugal. And perhaps more of these complex corporate entities will no longer exist and DAOs will become a more widespread solution. But the reality right now for many is that we straddle two worlds and are in a transition period where we need to learn to operate these new types of businesses before we think about automating them away. So as companies holding tokens becomes more mainstream, I think there will definitely need to be more support for running these complex organizations. Just as there's 10 million SaaS tools to help startups run their businesses, I think there's a massive opportunity for tools and businesses to support this next generation of startups. We're starting to see this support, and I expect to see much more. Tools like tax tracking and accounting that can track crypto assets without manual intervention, contract templates and tools that are streamlined for global businesses, asset management dashboards and alerts to help you stay on top of your finances, asset managers and portfolio advisors for large and small companies to help companies manage their treasury and trading strategies, and so much more. In this industry, while we may functionally be startups coordinating to build software and validate it in the market, we're operationally not running startups anymore, but we're building multinational businesses that are far more complex than we could have anticipated, and we must acknowledge and adapt to this operational risk. We're in a transition period where, in order to be sustainable, we must bridge the gap between real-world operations functions and the new world of company management. And that means being smart about cash and understanding and complying with the rules and regulations of traditional systems. And while the technology wants to operate without bounds, we in the real world must play within the traditional systems to hedge our risk. As Nicholas Taleb once said, to sleep well, hedge all your tail exposures. Be open and hide nothing from your enemies. Pay all your taxes, as unpaid taxes are the mother of all tail risk. Be uncancelable, back up your data, and hold some gold or Bitcoin. If we play our cards right, I think we'll do just fine. And if you have questions, please reach out to me at Informal for everything that we've learned along the way. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. That was awesome. I really couldn't tell you how many of those are so applicable.
That's what I was like, all these, a lot of these crypto, like blockchain startups have the same issues, operational challenges. So hopefully it resonated.
Yeah, I might not be dealing with a lot of them anymore, but oh my, at the beginning, big challenge. That was great though. I personally really enjoyed it. Hope everyone else did. We have a couple QA questions to go through really quickly. And then, someone just voted. I'll just go in them in order, how they voted, and we'll go from there. So tell us about a time you've witnessed a true feat of social coordination at Cosmos ICF.
Cool. I think we see it all the time. I mean, as I said, right now there are 7 companies working together to make IBC come to life. So, I mean, that is and there's people who are taking leadership positions and owning the decision-making responsibility and coordination of all of those groups, but that is not an easy task in any way. And so I think we're seeing that right now really play out and come to life. And it's like a really fascinating social experiment to see how, responsibility of different parts can be kind of distributed among so many teams and what that takes to coordinate with one another. So.
That's awesome. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Next up, how can blockchain companies reduce the complexity, both in their organizational structure and financial statements? Or is complexity the only solution for managing risk in the blockchain industry?
That's a great question. To be honest, I ask myself this all the time. Is complexity our only answer? I I think that at least from my perspective, I've done this for 3 different organizations over the past 3 years. And I think like just having the experience of going through like how to set up companies, how to hire, how to do all these things, you kind of create a playbook. So one way of like reducing the complexity is just like working with people who have gone through these experiences themselves. And then similarly, I think like, you know, there are ways to reduce the complexity by leaning on outside providers as much as possible. I mean, we like, just for quick example, like we lean on back office support for accounting and payroll and all of these things to kind of streamline the back end, like back office complexities that can be like completely overwhelming to company operations if you are trying to do everything yourself. So I think like leaning on outside firms when you can, and also taking advice from people who have kind of gone through these organizational complexities themselves are 2 solutions. Are we frozen?
Oh, sorry. Yep. Don't know what happened there, but we're good. I got that. I got it right to the end. That's awesome. Yeah. So, I mean, it's like, would you say then at the end of the day, it's kind of like you just got to battle through it?
You do. I just think like the interesting part of this industry is that there is no playbook. You're kind of creating your own playbook. So it's like, while, you know, all these YC startups have like a great playbook of like how to set up a Delaware corporation, and here's your corporation docs, and here's how you know, do your first seed round and blah, blah, blah. That kind of playbook doesn't exist in this industry. So we've kind of been making it up as we go along.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. Thank you for that. And finally, one last question here. More specific to Informal Systems, what's the biggest challenge you faced while structuring it?
Great question. So at Informal, we're headquartered in Canada, but we have a subsidiary, a wholly owned subsidiary in Switzerland, and then a branch office in Austria. We originally thought we were going to have a separate country in Austria, or a separate company in Austria, but you know, Austrian governments don't want anyone who isn't Austrian to set up companies there. So just purely structuring was like a feat on itself, trying to get you know, all of these entities set up, getting bank accounts in every country and whatnot. And I think secondly, Informal is structured like a workers cooperative where every member after 9 months of being with the company gets a vote, a member vote. And so essentially it means the company is democratically controlled by the employees. And this concept has been incredibly challenging to structure while still being a CCPC, like a Canadian controlled private corporation in Canada, because we have to balance like having international members while also being Canadian controlled. So I think like that is another thing that we've really had to struggle through a bit, but eventually we got there.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's we've chatted about your structure before. It's a very, very unique structure. Yeah. That's super awesome. Yeah, anyway, thank you so much, Arianne, for coming out today, giving us that awesome chat, kind of go like, you know, business and blockchain and like how to kind of get that set up. And yeah, hopefully everyone had a great, learn some stuff. Feel free to reach out to Arianne if you have any questions about that. And we thank you again for coming out today to CSCON.
Thanks for having me.